In New York, the United Nations has confirmed that its international staff members who were confined by Yemen's Houthi authorities are now free to move within the organization's compound in Sana'a. The update follows several tense days after an armed raid on the facility by the group's security forces, a dramatic episode that briefly plunged the UN mission into crisis. UN spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric told reporters that the 15 international employees representing various UN agencies are safe and in contact with their families. His tone was cautious but relieved as he described how the situation has stabilized inside the compound. "We have been informed by our team in Yemen," he said, that the 15 international UN staff members are now free to move around inside the UN compound in Sana'a and are in contact with their respective UN entities and their families. The incident began on October 18th when armed men entered the UN facility in the Yemeni capital. The Houthis, who control Sana'a and much of northern Yemen, reportedly conducted the raid under what they called administrative authority. But for the United Nations, it was an alarming breach of diplomatic norms and international law. The organization immediately demanded access to all staff and clarification of their status. For several days, communication was limited. Families of the detained workers waited anxiously, some of them sharing messages through UN channels and humanitarian networks. The Secretary General's office described the situation as deeply troubling, noting that UN personnel are neutral civil servants protected under international conventions. Now, with the 15 internationals able to move again, the UN has described the outcome as a partial improvement. But Dujarric emphasized that the crisis is not over. In his words, in addition, the 5 national staff members who were detained during that October 18th raid have also been released. As a reminder, 53 of our national colleagues in Yemen continue to be arbitrarily detained. That last line underlines the larger ongoing challenge for the UN's operations in Yemen. Those 53 local employees, Yemeni nationals working for various UN agencies, including humanitarian and development branches, remain in Houthi custody. Some have been detained for more than a year. Their cases have rarely been made public for fear of retaliation. The United Nations has repeatedly called on the de facto authorities to free all detained staff immediately and without conditions. Senior officials at UN headquarters say the organization is engaging through multiple channels, including direct communication with Houthi representatives in Sana'a and with mediators in Oman. The raid on the UN compound is only the latest in a series of confrontations between the Houthis and international organizations operating in Yemen. Over the past year, aid agencies have reported growing interference, including restrictions on movement, confiscation of equipment, and intimidation of staff. The UN says these actions are making it harder to deliver life-saving assistance in a country where more than 20 million people still depend on humanitarian aid. At the heart of the issue lies Yemen's prolonged civil conflict, now entering its 11th year. The Houthis seized the capital in 2014, prompting a Saudi-led coalition to intervene in 2015 on behalf of the internationally recognized government. Since then, the country has fractured with multiple power centers, economic collapse, and one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Although frontline fighting has decreased compared to earlier years, tensions remain high. A fragile truce brokered in 2022 slowed the pace of airstrikes and cross-border attacks, but political negotiations have stalled. Analysts say incidents like the recent raid underscore how far Yemen still is from achieving stable governance or a lasting peace. Inside the UN compound in Sana'a, sources describe a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Staff who had been confined to their offices for days are now able to walk within the premises, resume limited communications, and reconnect with families abroad. But many say they remain on edge, aware that the security environment is unpredictable and that the Houthis maintain tight control over all international presence in the city. In Geneva, UN human rights officials echoed calls for accountability, warning that detentions of humanitarian personnel constitute violations of international humanitarian law. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has demanded access to those still held, describing the detentions as part of a broader pattern of intimidation against civil society, journalists and aid workers in Houthi-controlled areas. Humanitarian organizations working in Yemen reacted with mixed feelings to the latest development. Relief agencies welcomed the release of the detained national staff and the improved conditions for the international team, but many remain concerned about the precedent this sets. Several NGOs have already scaled down their field presence, citing fears for the safety of their personnel. Observers point out that Yemen's conflict has created a governance vacuum where de facto authorities often operate beyond international oversight. The Houthis, who call themselves Ansar Allah, control not only the capital but also large parts of the country's north and west, including key ports on the Red Sea. They collect taxes, administer justice, and regulate aid operations, effectively functioning as a parallel government. In such a context, even UN agencies must negotiate daily access and permissions. The October 18th incursion showed how quickly these arrangements can unravel. According to humanitarian coordinators, the gunmen who entered the compound initially refused to identify themselves, demanded staff lists, and ordered several employees into vehicles waiting outside. For hours, the UN was unable to confirm their whereabouts. News of the raid triggered swift reactions at the Security Council. Western members called for the immediate release of all detained personnel, stressing that the United Nations must be able to operate independently and safely in every country. Russia and China, while also expressing concern, urged restraint and dialogue, noting the complexity of Yemen's political landscape. In Washington, the US State Department condemned the detentions, describing them as an affront to international law. The European Union issued a similar statement, saying that interference with UN operations undermines humanitarian relief and erodes trust between local authorities and the international community. For the families of the 53 Yemenis still held, the diplomatic statements bring little comfort. Many have gone months without news. Some detainees were reportedly seized from their homes, others from aid offices in Sana'a and Hodeidah. Human rights groups say several have been denied legal representation or contact with relatives. Meanwhile, UN missions in other conflict zones, from Sudan to the Democratic Republic of Congo, are watching closely. They see the Yemen incident as a reminder of how vulnerable UN personnel can be in environments where political control is contested. Inside the Secretariat building in New York, diplomats say Secretary General Antonio Guterres has raised the matter personally in recent calls with regional leaders. His office continues to press for the release of all detained staff, while emphasizing that humanitarian work in Yemen must not be politicized. The UN's resident coordinator in Yemen has also urged calm, telling staff that safety procedures are being reviewed and that engagement with the de facto authorities will continue through all available means. For the people of Yemen, the episode is another sign of how the country's crisis extends far beyond the battlefield. Years of war, economic collapse, and international isolation have created an environment where even humanitarian actors face threats. The World Food Programme, UNICEF, and WHO have all reported severe operational hurdles, from fuel shortages to customs delays, complicating their efforts to reach millions in need. Yet despite those obstacles, aid convoys continue to move. Health workers keep clinics open, and UN agencies persist in negotiating access to deliver food, medicine, and vaccines in some of the most remote parts of the country. Diplomats say the Houthis' decision to allow the 15 international staff to move freely again may be an attempt to ease international pressure. The group has faced growing criticism, not only from the United Nations, but also from regional mediators who fear that incidents like this could derail ongoing peace talks. Omani and Saudi negotiators have been quietly trying to revive dialogue between the Houthis and Yemen's internationally recognized government. Their goal is to transform the informal truce into a formal ceasefire and open the way for broader political talks. But progress remains slow and trust is thin. For now, the United Nations insists it will continue its work in Yemen, focusing on humanitarian relief, demining operations, and economic stabilization programs. Officials describe the situation as fragile but manageable. They stress that staff safety remains the organization's top priority. As Stéphane Dujarric concluded during the briefing, the UN remains committed to its mission in Yemen despite the risks. We will continue to engage, he said, and we will continue to call for the immediate release of all our detained colleagues. That determination reflects a broader principle the UN has held for decades, that humanitarian work must go on, even in the most difficult circumstances. In Yemen, that mission is far from over. The hope among diplomats and aid workers alike is that this latest episode, troubling as it was, will strengthen the call for protection of all humanitarian personnel and remind every party to the conflict that neutrality is not a threat. It is a lifeline. For now, inside the UN compound in Sana'a, 15 staff members can once again walk through their corridors, speak to their families, and resume their work, a small but significant step toward restoring normalcy amid years of turmoil. And beyond the compound walls, millions of Yemenis still wait for peace, food, and the simple safety that so many in the world take for granted.